The story that I am going to tell you today happened a few years ago to an ex-employee of the Stockton Rural Cemetery, located in the city of Stockton, California.
What happened to me that day? I remember as if it had happened to me today. Many years have passed, 13 to be exact. However, I cannot forget anything that happened to me that time.
My name is Jeremy, and at that time, economically I was pretty bad. I had been fired from my previous job, and I couldn't find employment for nowhere. Thanks to a friend, I was able to begin a job that I thought about in having, until that day. I never believed that destiny would lead me to work in a cemetery. It's hard to get started. You are always surrounded by death, sad people, and the energy in those places feels quite heavy. But with time, and as in everything, you finish by get used to it. Not only do you get used to the sadness and death of the place, but that also, the noises and shadows that at first caused you fear, or the voices whispering in your ear without anyone around you. As time goes by, you normalize them and you downplay its importance. There are people who never see or feel anything. I personally believe in everything I see, and believe me, I saw many things in the cemetery. I remember that day, and as was usual during the week, we had to close the entrance doors at 4:30 in the afternoon. So, normally what was done half an hour before was to go around to notify the people who were still inside that the cemetery was about to close its doors. In this way, we made sure that no one was left inside. The cemetery has two main streets that surround a large part of the tombstones, and that Tuesday, I had to go on the left side. When I began the tour, I met several people to whom I gave notice. The cemetery is quite large, so it is better to notify in advance, so that people can slowly walk towards the entrance. As I told you before, I was walking along the left side street, and reaching the middle of the route, I met a guy sitting on one of the benches that the cemetery has. I calculate that the distance that separated me from this person, it was more of 50 yards. So, I decided to go closer to tell him that the cemetery was about to close its doors. Something particular that usually happens in cemeteries is that most people are distracted and lose track of time. More than anything, it is because of the sadness that each person feels when visiting or saying goodbye to a loved one. For this reason, we must give them notice, so people do not stay locked up. I was slowly getting closer to this man when I crossed paths with a woman who greeted me very kindly, and before I said anything to her, she told me that my colleague had already told her a few minutes that we were about to close. I continued walking until I reached this man, who was sitting on the bench with his elbows resting on his knees, leaning forward and with his head looking at the ground. I greet him with a "Good afternoon," and I tell him, "Sir, excuse me, I wanted to let you know that the cemetery will be closing its doors in 15 more minutes." The man, without making a sound, only just stared at me and remained silent. The truth is that at that moment I felt very sorry for this man. His face showed a lot of sadness. I remember that it occurred to me to ask him if everything was okay. At that moment he looked up again, and I realized that his eyes were full of tears. Immediately the man looks at the floor again and begins to cry disconsolately. I instantly decided to approach him. I put my hand on his shoulder and sat next to him. I told him to calm down, that everything was going to get better. I asked him if he could help him with anything. I remember I also asked him his name. He turned his head towards me, looked at me intently, and with his eyes full of tears he told me that his name was Peter. The truth is that it is very difficult to explain what you feel at that moment. I saw so much sadness in that look that I could feel within me what this man was experiencing. It was a horrible feeling of suffering and anguish, but above all I felt an energy very dense. After telling me his name, he told me, "No, friend, you can't help me. My pain no longer has a solution." At that moment, He pointed to his right side, and a few feet from where we were sitting, there was a tombstone with the name of Thomas Angel. That grave belongs to my son, you know. He went me away and I don't know how to continue. Everything is over for me and I don't know what else to do. I talked for a pair of minutes more with him, trying to calm him down, but the truth is that I didn't know what to say. I imagined that the pain of losing a child must be something terrible. I noticed that, at one point, it was even difficult for him to breathe. I told him to wait a few minutes, that I was going to bring him some of water. Usually, the cemetery maintenance staff, and more than anything during the months of very heat. We have 1 or 2 sheds, where we usually keep our tools and a small refrigerator to have fresh water. It was pretty close, I estimate about 30 yards, so I went to the shed, got a bottle of water and went back to Peter. But to my surprise, when arriving where we were sitting, Peter was no longer there. I looked for him on the main street. I went to the end of the cemetery and nothing. I couldn't find him anywhere. Was gone. And I stayed bad and quite worried, mostly because I had really been moved by this man's story. And you could tell that he had so much anguish in its inward, that the truth is in that state, he could do anything. That day I finished my tour while I was looking for it, and when I couldn't find it, I went to the shed, kept the bottle of water, and then headed towards the exit, to finish my work day. On Friday morning of that same week, making my way as usual, something happened to me that ended up closing Peter's story. I was returning for the streets I had left, and while was reaching the place where he had found me with that man, I see standing next to the grave that Peter had pointed out to me, a woman who I estimate would have between 55 and 60 years old. I approached where this lady was out of curiosity, and more than anything, to ask her how Peter was, and of course if she knew him. "Good morning," I told. She looked at me surprised, and I got even closer so I could talk to her. I told her what happened on Tuesday of that same week. That I had been talking to Peter, that I had seen him very sad about the loss of his son, and that seeing him so bad, I was quite worried that he would do something crazy when he was alone. I told that I wanted to help him, but me was impossible, since when I went for some water, when I came back, he was no longer. The lady looked at me in silence and very surprised. She let some tears fall, and when I finished speaking, the first thing she did was look at the grave that Peter had pointed out to me, and immediately after, she returned her gaze to me and told me, "Dear young, Thomas Angel is my grandson, you know, and the grave next to him is that of my son Peter. What you are telling me leaves me speechless. Peter died on the same day and in the same accident as Thomas, a month and a half ago." At that moment I was speechless. The only thing I could do was take a few steps and read the name on the tombstone next to Thomas. Peter Angel, beloved husband, father, and son.
It gives me chills just telling it. I will never forget what happened to me at that moment.
Very well, friends, here I finish another great story. I send greetings to all of you and have a great day.
Light we'll see. No, I won't be afraid. Oh, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by.